So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to introduce our guest speakers for today, Dr. Gloria Puurveen and Dr. Heather Cooke. Dr. Gloria Puurveen is a researcher who's deeply passionate about and committed to understanding the experiences of older adults and people living with dementia, particularly in relation to living well to the end of life, personhood, and social citizenship. And her current work is centered on building volunteer capacity within hospice and palliative care organizations so that this can support older adults with declining health within their communities. And then Dr. Heather Cooke has more than 25 years experience working in dementia care in both a frontline and a research capacity. And Heather holds a PhD in interdisciplinary studies. And most recently, she's worked as a research associate at the UBC School of Nursing, where she was a part of a research team exploring the experiences of family members as they navigate caring for a relative living with dementia. And Heather now works with us here at the Alzheimer Society of BC, which we are so thrilled about. And she leads the organization's knowledge mobilization efforts. So Gloria and Heather, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about this very important topic. I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Heather. And Sarah, that was such a beautiful little introduction. I just feel quite elated. I am so delighted to be here in this space with you all. I only can see just a handful of people on my screen because I'm sharing my screen. So it's really neat to see your names and some faces. And it's nice to see that we can actually see you in some way versus when the camera's off and there's just speaking to this empty space. So you are welcome to write your comments and questions in the chat, but we'll be holding our questions to the end of the presentation. I think Heather and I have left ample time to have a discussion and would really like to hear from you and your experiences and your thoughts. I'd like to start with an acknowledgement and acknowledge the lands that we are located on. I am on the unsurrendered traditional and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm here in Vancouver. And Heather is located on the territories of the Siletz people, also known as Summerland in the Okanagan. We are committed not only to simply acknowledge these territories, but to realize that acknowledgement is an active dedication to a more just and more accountable relations. So today we're going to talk about care conferences in long-term care. And before we really delve into that, we'd like to take a bit of a temperature check on your experiences with them. And so we don't have the capacity to do an actual poll, but if you can, write a yes or a no in the chat box of whether you have participated in a care conference in a long-term care home before. So there seems to be a bit of a balance. Well, maybe more no's than yeses. Is that what I'm seeing? All right. Then the next question we have for you in relation to, for those who have participated in care conferences, how comfortable are you discussing your concerns? Are you not at all comfortable, somewhat comfortable, or really comfortable? I think hopefully by the end of the session, you'll have some tools in your toolkit to be able to kind of charge forward into these care conferences and feel a little bit more comfortable in those spaces. All right. Thank you everyone for sharing. So we're going to move forward. Heather.
Okay, so for some of you, what I'm about to share might be familiar. For some of you, it might not be. But as the slide says, I want you to picture this. You have been invited to this meeting to talk about your family member. You've arrived early, but the doors to the room in which the meeting is to be held are currently closed. A minute or two before the meeting is to begin, the door is open, and another family member who you vaguely recognize smiles at you as you walk past. The staff member at the door beckons you in and offers you a seat at the table. As you sit down and you look around, there's some faces you recognize and some you don't. The woman on your right, whom you recognize as the director of care, wastes no time and launches right in. We're here today for Mrs. Smith, she says. Her admission date was April the 5th, 2022. The diagnoses we have on file are dementia, hypertension, and osteoarthritis. Her CPS is 4. Her most recent MMSE score was 7. Her admission weight, 56.5 kilograms, and her current weight, that's about 56 kilograms. She continues to read from the sheet in front of her and proceeds to note your mother's most recent blood pressure, her pulse, and her respirations. She continues, I'm now going to go over the information that's been provided by staff on all shifts. Day shift says she sleeps in most days. She's incredibly pleasant and she eats well. Evening says she likes to watch travel shows and stays up late to watch hockey. She's quite independent and sleeps through the night. No concerns there, they say. OT, PT, and rehab say she's walking with a 4-wheeled walker during the day. Her Braden score is 16. They don't have a lot of concerns from a care standpoint. She's happy and settled. The woman to your left takes over, again reading from the sheet in front of her. Mrs. Smith has attended X number of activities in the past few months. She's an energetic, fun-loving lady with many interests. She particularly likes the musical activities and socializes well with her table mates at mealtimes. She's a really nice lady. The next woman at the table continues. Mrs. Smith is on a general diet with a cut-up texture, and she notes that staff provide assistance to your mom at the table. Now your mother's doctor, who slipped in just as the meeting started, smiles and looks over at the DOC, or the Director of Care. And her LOI is an M2, replies the director. The doctor notes, your mom has expressed in the past a DNR if her heart stops. But if it was anything less, we would help support her, she says, looking at you. You nod, wishing there was far less jargon involved here. Do you have any other questions? Asks the director. Flustered and a bit bewildered by the pace at which everything's just been presented, you nod. You tell them that your mom preferred showering when she was in her own home. The director responds, we're only funded for 1 bath a week, but we could do a managed risk agreement, which would outline what could happen if she showers alone and slips and falls. I'll put that form together and call you when it's ready for you to sign. Feel free to call any of us if you have any concerns. The doctor and the director stand, indicating the meeting's over. The director walks you to the door, and as you exit, you smile at the next family member waiting in turn. So does that sound like something you may have experienced? Because the scenario that I've just recounted is something that we witnessed multiple times during our research. The care conferences rarely had introductions. Staff spoke with jargon-filled sentences. We certainly love our jargon in long-term care. And few provided opportunities for family caregivers' thoughts or perspectives. So today, we're here to talk about how you can get more out of your relatives' care conferences. Gloria. So by the end of today's session, you'll be able to identify who those primary attendees are at a care conference. Who are they and what are their roles? You'll be able to determine some of the key questions that you might want to ask regarding your relative's needs. You'll be able to identify what documentation might be helpful to have prepared in advance. And you'll have acquired some tips for effective communication with the care team. Gloria, back to you.
So I'd just like to take a little step back and situate care conferences in the wider context of family involvement in care homes. So families are estimated to provide about 10 hours a week of direct care to their relative in care, and this continues a role that has begun long before their relatives move into the home. Families are so much more than just a visitor. They help the relative with a broad range of things, including physical care, social and emotional support, helping them with meals, care coordination and advocacy. They even help the other residents. So families significantly contribute to the well-being of their own relative while also supporting other residents, helping to decrease experiences of loneliness and isolation, and fostering a sense of community and belonging. So given that the importance of family involvement, there is really surprisingly very little policy that supports the inclusion of families within care homes, and very little policy that helps guide how families and care teams can communicate effectively and collaborate with each other. So there's a few mechanisms by which we can have avenues for communication between family and healthcare staff. Some of it's very informal through these phone calls that you have with the facilities care staff, or with these chats in the hall, informally connecting with team members of the care team and talking about needs as they arise. And then there's a couple of more formal opportunities, one of them being family councils, which might occur on a monthly basis, depending on the facility or the home. And these are a forum for families to meet with the home and with each other, and to promote the collective interests of residents. And then that last sort of formal opportunity is within a care conference. And these are formal meetings with family and care teams. And so in BC, our care plans are to be developed with the participation of residents and family members, and they must be reviewed annually. While care conferences are not specified in BC regulations as platforms for reviewing these plans, they seem to be taken up this way. So the goal of a care conference is to bring families and residents and the healthcare team together to discuss the residents' health status, preferences, activities, and so forth, in order to develop this care plan, or in some places they call it goals of care conversations. So why are they important? Well, it really gives you as a family member the opportunity to participate in the decision making as it relates to the development of that care plan. And as there's not really many formal opportunities for everyone to come together, a care conference can really help serve as a forum to enhance communication between the healthcare team and for families. And ideally, this means that everyone will then be on the same page. So how often do they occur? They typically occur within the first 6 weeks of a move-in date. That's the goal. Sometimes it doesn't happen depending on the other competing priorities that are happening within a care home. And then after, it's annually thereafter. But if there's a significant change in your relative's health status, then a care conference may be called.
So thinking back to that story that I shared, what is it that you can expect to actually occur at a care conference? Well, while there's really rarely any kind of set agenda, there's definitely a script by which the care conference unfolds. And often that script looks a lot like what we described, or what I described in that story at the start. But while many conferences sort of proceed in this similar manner, there is some variation from home to home in terms of who's involved and the degree to which families are involved. Now, the conference typically focuses on challenges or care needs that may have recently arisen. So, for example, if your family member is losing weight, there may be some discussion around how to increase their weight, maybe some dietary changes that could be made, additional nutritional supplements that may be introduced, or addressing any dental issues that may have started to emerge. Care conferences are also often the time when the care team will ask for your consent around treatment decisions, such as the medical orders for scope of treatment, or the MOST, which is what I referred to in this scenario. Now, typically, each care team member will report on the resident's care needs within their particular disciplinary area. But one member may cover for another team member if they're unable to attend that particular day. So, who are the team members that are most likely to be present at a care conference? Well, ideally, those present would include those who are listed on your screen. But it's important to note that there's really considerable variation, again, between homes and even within homes, depending on how often staff are working and what the day is unfolding like as to who's actually present at the meeting. Now, first on the list is the Director of Care, an individual who's also known colloquially as the DOC. And this is the individual who oversees care staff. They're responsible for ensuring the overall quality of resident care, and in many cases, they're going to be the individual who's chairing the meeting. Second on the list is a care aide, also known as a resident care aide or a health care aide. And ideally, they'd be present because of all of the team members that are listed on your screen, they're the ones who work most closely with the residents. They're the ones that attend to their daily care needs. But given the staffing shortages that we're experiencing in many of our long-term care homes, they may not be able to step away from the unit to attend the meeting and instead may simply submit a report that the Director of Care may read out. Now, a physician may also attend, and in many sites, this will be the medical director of the home. That's the physician who's responsible for the residents living within that care home, rather than the resident's former family doctor. Although certainly in some of the more rural areas in the province and here in the interior as well, it can well be the resident's family doctor would attend the meeting. The community pharmacist may also be present, and this is the individual who oversees the residents' medications and who, along with the physician, will talk about the current medications and any changes or updates that might be required. For many of you, the recreation therapist might be the individual with whom you're most familiar as you sit around the table, particularly depending on when it is that you're in at the care home, spending time with your family member. And the rec therapist is the individual who oversees the recreation or activity program within the home. And these individuals will speak to the types of activities that your family member attends, and quite likely the frequency of their participation in those activities. Now, the dietitian, well, that's the individual who's responsible for overseeing the dietary requirements of the residents and also the menu planning. And so they'll speak to your family members' eating habits, the degree to which they may or may not require some sort of dietary modification. So if your family member has diabetes, that individual may be on a diabetic diet. Or some individuals may have texture modifications to their diet. And so she might talk about a minced texture, which are those individuals who may experience mild to moderate chewing difficulties. It might be a pureed diet for those who can't tolerate regular food due to perhaps more severe chewing or swallowing problems. Or she may talk about the use or need for thickened fluids for those who may again have those swallowing difficulties and might not be able to imbibe those regular fluids. Now, the physiotherapist, I should say, the occupational therapist, or a rehab assistant or rehabilitation assistant may also sit in on the meeting. And these are the individuals who assist the staff in providing safe care that really maximizes a resident's ability and minimizes that risk of injury. So they'll speak to the residents' mobility, their ability to transfer from a bed to a chair or to a wheelchair. They'll talk about their fall risk and that activation of their physical capacity, so their range of motion and their strength. And then the last one on the screen there is the social worker. And so this is the individual who supports residents and families as the resident transitions to life in a congregate care setting. They support the emotional and social wellness of residents and will typically speak to the residents' emotional well-being. Now, I should note that not all homes have social workers or occupational and physiotherapists on staff. They may contract those staff to come in periodically. And so, we often see that those staff are not full-time within a care home. And again, that often depends on where you find yourself within the province. Gloria.
So As you can see, there are many healthcare disciplines that come together, and this kind of creates a bit of a challenge in terms of the language and the words that are used. And I call this kind of discipline-centric language. And this really contributes to, a significant challenge of care conferences, and that's the amount of jargon that is used. In Heather's story, there was 6 instances of acronyms or discipline-specific words that were used without explanation. For example, the CPS or the MMSE, and then somebody said the M2 and so forth. And I put a bit of a list here of things that you might see and might hear during a care conference. As certainly as I was going through some of the observations that Heather and I have done in our research, these were the most common jargony acronyms that we came across. So, but what really happens is that jargon creates communication silos and excludes those who don't know the meaning of these words and the implication for their relative. It's really therefore quite difficult to follow the conversation and then participate meaningfully in it. So think back to the story that Heather relayed earlier. The doctor asks the family member if the M2 designation was okay. It was really challenging for this family member to fully participate in this decision that needed to be made at that point in time. This was not sufficiently explained to her, and she was not given any time to process what was being said. So, conversations in care conferences are not necessarily a dialogue that invite active participation of family members or create space for you to contribute your knowledge of your relative's situation. And this really leads us to think that there's such an urgent need to move away from these scripted reports, from a problem-focused conference, and move towards these collaborative dialogues that focuses on residents' strengths in addition to their challenges. And you as family members, family members play such an important role here. And for the duration of this presentation, we'll talk about some of the things you can do to make the conference more collaborative. And I see that, okay, thank you, Lori. I'm like, oh, I've never been said that I'm soft-spoken. That really made my day, Victoria. So Heather, back to you. Oh, no, that's me. So here are a few things that you can do prior to the care conference. So think about confirming the details of the conference. And there's a few things here that I want to highlight. So not only do you confirm your attendance, but confirm the attendance of who will be present at the conference, so you can then tailor some questions to that person. And that's useful because if the rec therapist is not going to be there and you want to, ask her about specific activities that your relative is involved in, the other people may not be able to answer that as fully as the rec therapist. So it's useful to know who's going to be there. So the second thing to confirm is the duration of the care conference. So the time allotted for conferences really vary between different homes. In our research, we saw homes having an hour care conference and other homes having 20 minutes. So that's a huge, huge difference. And it really helps you then to prepare some of the things that you might want to talk about that are really pressing. And then also ask if there's a care conference that's following yours. So if there are things that you really need to ask and you're running out of time, that you may or may not be allowed to go overtime. So it's useful to know whether there's another care conference there. And then the final thing to confirm is really about an agenda. So Heather said often there is not an agenda, but some homes are moving towards an agenda. And if they do have an agenda, ask for it and ask if you can have a copy and if you can be added to that agenda. So if you have concerns saying, hey, I would like to be on this agenda, maybe put me first on the agenda so I have time. So the next thing that you might want to do prior to the conference is jot down your concerns and your compliments. It really can be overwhelming to walk into the care conference space, and you might feel apprehensive about sharing your thoughts or asking questions. So before you're coming, write these things down that you're concerned about or that you have questions about. And it's also really kind of important to write about the things that you are pleased about and share that with staff. They like to hear about the things that you're happy about with as well. So then the final thing to think about before the care conference is key aspects of your relative's personhood. And sometimes care conferences can be so clinical and so problem focused, and you really know your relative best. And you can highlight the person's strengths and their capacities, their preferences, and the things that are meaningful to them, and jot some of these down and slip them into the conversation as that conversation unfolds. So for example, the dietitian is talking about meals, and you can share things about that worked well for you when your relative was living at home. So whether they had a plate with a rim on it, or if they preferred a fork to a spoon, or maybe the recreation is sharing things about activities, and you share that your relative is an avid gardener and it's moving into the summertime, and you could ask whether there's opportunities for your relative to participate in the planting or the maintenance of garden or the pot plants around the home. So those are 3 things to think about, general things to think about prior to the care conference. And Heather's going to share with us things that you can think about during the care conference.
Great. So one of the things you can do is ask those clarifying questions. So for example, as the conference starts, ask whether notes will be taken and distributed, or if you should jot down some of the key points of things that are being said during the conference. You may also want to take someone with you. Often we think about taking someone with us to a doctor's appointment if we were, receiving perhaps some unexpected news, because sometimes it's a lot to take in. So that note piece, and maybe you take another family member along, and their role is simply to be your scribe and take notes of the key things that come up. So thinking back to the chart that Gloria showed, all of the jargon, some of those key terms, ask for clarification for jargon that you might not have heard before, or that you might not understand. And similarly, if there's something that you're not quite sure you understand or that you heard correctly, you can always ask, what do you mean by that? And ask them to clarify. To ensure that you're on the same page as the folks around the table and that you've understood something correctly, you could follow up with, so I hear you saying ... So for example, following a dietitian's comment, you might say, so I'm hearing you say that to help him gain some weight, you're going to introduce a nutritional supplement for him to drink mid-morning and before bedtime. Or in response to the low number of activities that your family member may have attended during the previous month, you might say to the rec therapist, so I'm hearing you say that you're a little concerned about my mom's social integration or her social isolation. And you might also consider sharing something that you've observed that's different. So for example, I found my husband was able to dress himself if I put his clothes in a particular order on the bedroom chair. And then in terms of the health progression, your family member's health progression, if the pharmacist or the physician brings up a particular medication or a treatment option, you want to ask about the risks and benefits. Are there side effects, weight loss, or drowsiness? And if you're talking about medication, don't be afraid to ask if there are non-pharmaceutical options to achieve the same ends. So are there some behavioral modifications that can be implemented? And if you're talking about end-of-life planning, for example, the medical orders for scope of treatment, ask what kinds of decisions the home might expect you to make. And ask if they've got any information that they might be able to share with you to help you prepare for some of those decisions that lie ahead. And don't be shy about sharing your knowledge of your family member. When I worked in long-term care, I found it so helpful to have that background knowledge about an individual's preferences, their past activity patterns, really celebrating their personhood. What is it that they love? What is it that they can't stand? I have called far too many bingo games in my lifetime, and I don't ever want to have to play it if I ever enter a long-term care home. And wherever possible, you really want to link those questions, those staff questions, to your family members' experiences and preferences. So we've shared with you the purpose of care conferences. We've talked about who typically attends them and how you can prepare and some of the questions you might ask during the conference itself. And we also wanted to leave you with just some tips for effective communication with the care team in general. And so one of the ways that you can be prepared is to keep a journal of your visits. What do you notice when you're at the home? Jot down any questions that you have and maybe keep a running list. And then you can draw on this list when you're visiting the home or when you're at the care conference. And don't be shy about identifying yourself as your family member's advocate. That can really help staff understand the place from which you come when you're asking those questions. And while staff might spend more time with your family member now, you still have those insights and knowledge, a lifetime of those insights and knowledge, if you will, and those perspectives are also important. Now, don't save up all of your questions for the care conference. You'll kind of want to ask them as things emerge. That way you can address things before they can become big things. I've got a colleague who describes it as dealing with things at the dot. So it's so much easier to deal with things when they're a tiny dot before they gradually become a molehill or they become a mountain. So think about whom the individual is, to whom is the best person to answer your question. Who should you direct those questions to? Is it something to do with your relative's diet or eating? Well, that's probably a question for the dietitian. Is it a question for the care aide or the licensed practical nurse, the LPN, who often oversees the care aides, commonly on more than one unit? But if you've got a medication question, that's something that would go to the LPN because they're the ones that handle and distribute the medication. The care aides, however, if you've got a question about your family member's nighttime routine, well, you'll want to direct that to a care aide, and typically one who's probably working the evening shift rather than the early morning shift, because they're going to be the ones that have that information to hand. And as Gloria noted earlier, give that positive feedback and somewhat regularly to staff. While staff may do a few things that you don't really agree with, they're likely doing a fair number of things that you appreciate, but those don't often get pointed out. So remind yourself to look for and really proactively offer some of the appreciation for those things. And such appreciation can go quite a long way in fostering those good feelings, that sense of allyship, we're all in this together, and a reservoir of trust and goodwill. And that just makes it a little bit easier when it comes to raising concerns that you might have. You also want to be clear about in what format you want to hear from the care home. Is it via email? Is it via a phone call? Do you want to be called in the evening if something arises late afternoon, early evening? Because that can sometimes leave you worrying right before bedtime or create a sleepless night as you toss and turn thinking about the concern that they've raised. If it's not urgent, maybe you want to just have staff wait until the following day or until the morning to contact you. And I think important to keep in mind as well that frequent contact from the care home might not be as possible as once was the case. Hopefully we'll get back there. But given COVID, given the health human resource challenges that so many of our care homes are facing right now, sometimes we need to cut a bit of slack there. Anyways, Gloria, back over to you.
So that kind of concludes our sort of the formal presentation of things, and hopefully that you're going to be walking away with some ideas of what the care conferences are and who's involved and how you might be how you can be more engaged with them. So I just wanted to acknowledge that Rose wrote something in the chat. She's like, there was no agenda or no notes provided following the care conference, although they requested those. And that is totally something that we have seen. And although I am seeing that, I think some care homes that I know of are starting to provide agendas, which is a huge thing.
I just wanted to go back to Rose's comment about not having the agenda beforehand and no notes are provided. For family members, is this something that if it's important to you for your records to have those notes, should you follow up again? And how persistent should you be if that's something that's important to you?
I think, you can I think you should enter into a dialogue with probably the director of care, is the person who usually organizes the care conferences, and say it's really important for you to be able to know what's going to be addressed at the care conference so you can be prepared for them. And so if you let them know the importance of that agenda for you, I think that might entice them a bit more to actually create an agenda. Sometimes care homes don't realize that this is important for family members, and so to kind of enter into that by identifying the importance to you might be helpful. And I think you can be pretty persistent on that, and maybe that would change some practice.
Right, thank you. That's very helpful. We received another question in the chat box. Valerie wanted to know, is the resident invited to the care conference as well, or just the family member?
And that is such a great question. So when we put the slide up of who would be attending a care conference, we were really, that was the focus on staff, because we wanted to explain the staff. But absolutely, the residents, nothing about us without us is often, what we hear folks living with dementia say. And, it's really important if they have that opportunity to be at the conference, to be there. Now, many homes won't invite the individual. There may be reasons where it's more difficult for the resident to come and participate, but that's certainly something you can suggest to the home in case they haven't thought of that. I'd really like to bring my mom or my husband, or I'd like for them to be present while we're having this conversation. And then sometimes it might be easier to have that conversation if there's concerns that you have, and you're not comfortable talking about those in front of your family member. One of the things that I know folks do in community living, I think is the organization, when they're talking and they've got conferences where they're discussing children, they'll often take a picture of the child and put that child in that picture in the middle of the table. And I've always really liked that idea. So if that's something, if your family member is unable to attend, think about taking a photo and putting that photo in the center of the table, because I think that really is a lovely reminder that we're talking about an individual here. We're not talking about, a head in a bed. We're talking about an individual. So anyways, just an idea there. Throw that out.
Yeah, and I think I'd like to sort of piggyback on that, Heather. And I just think about some of the care conference data that Heather and I had a look at during our research, and there was moments between, like across the care homes, where you could not tell one care conference apart from another based on what people were saying. They were all saying such scripted things about different people, and it didn't seem like they were different people. And so by bringing a photo, or the resident joining that care conference, reminds the care staff that indeed this is a person who's valued and beautiful for who they are, and not for some script like an M2, MMS, E3, things like that. It's just, it really, I think, is very distressing for me to hear that they're all kind of brushed in the same way. So I think it's really important, even if that, Valerie says many of our residents are very cognitively impaired. And yes, but I do think that they still have something very valuable to contribute in who they are and the reminder of staff of who they are. So, yeah.
Thanks, Gloria. Gloria, I do see that we've got a couple of questions, or one question, and someone else has said they're interested as well around MAID. And I'm gonna lob that one to you because I know that end of life is more your specialty than it is mine.
Yes.
And so Jonah has asked, if the option for MAID is agreed upon, how would that be incorporated in a care conference?
That's a really great question, Jonah, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to answer that because I believe that would be very individualized to the home itself and whether the home is able to provide MAID or whether they're conscientious objectors. And so I think there would be quite something quite individual in that, and whether that would be happening at at that annual care conference, it might be. I'm not sure. So you just kind of tweaked my imagination. So I would like to think about that a little bit more carefully because I'm not entirely sure how that gets incorporated. Maybe someone else on the call has an idea. I'm not sure.
And that's great if you're joining us today and you're an attendee and you have some knowledge of this from your own experience with long-term care, please feel welcome to share it. We know it's a very personal question, and Maureen shared in the chat box, please explain the MAID question. The question that we received in the chat box that Heather and Gloria are referring to is someone had asked, if the option for MAID is agreed upon, how would it be incorporated into a care conference? So I believe that's asking if someone had put in place requests for MAID or put plans in place, how this would be activated, or if the conversation of the activation of the medical assistance in dying order would happen, how that would be discussed in the care conference. And then, yeah, to Gloria's point, it's so individualistic by each care home that that's really a conversation that would probably be best for the director of care.
Mm-hmm. So I do have a question, something that sort of sparked my one of my questions, and it's going to be a question to you, Heather. When people earlier in the when we asked the question, have you attended care conferences, and if so, how comfortable? And people are saying, oh, we have no time to share our perspectives. So we've certainly heard that a lot, that families feel that they don't have enough time to share during the care conference. They're often at the very end of the agenda, so everybody on the care team gets to go, and then the family's left for the very last. And somebody wrote, well, we had 90 seconds to be able to participate. And so do you have any thoughts on how people might be able to negotiate this?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Gloria. And I think, one of the things, it's important to kind of have some of those conversations ahead of time. So often a care home will phone, they'll reach out by phone or reach out by email to let you know that a care conference is coming up. They are fairly scheduled, and often they'll be doing they'll set aside an afternoon where they have a series of care conferences. So when you get that call or when you get that email, and if you do have a couple of pressing things that you're like, I really want to make sure that I get this on the agenda, it might be something like MAID, and where you need to have a bit more time allotted to let them know that I'm coming with a couple of concerns. How much time do we have? Is it possible to get a bit of extra time? Or these are some of the things that I'm going to want to talk about, and that helps the staff as well. I think, right? Prepare what they understand is your more pressing concern. So maybe they're like, okay, well, we'll focus our discussion a bit more. So that's one suggestion. One of the other things is, and I think Gloria alluded to this, is around ensuring that you get on that agenda earlier rather than later. So, you get to the end, everyone looks at their watch, they're like, right, we've got 5 minutes left or 90 seconds left. Do you have any questions? And that's really not enough time to dive into the questions that you're there. And I think it's important, just to explicitly say this, that care conferences are not for the benefit of the care staff. It's not for them to tell you what's happening. I mean, it might be helpful if you haven't been in or you're at a distance, but at the same time, it's a dialogue, as Gloria says. And so how do we get more into that dialogue? So you really do have an active role. You deserve to have that seat at the table and to be there and to claim that space and that time. And so, just to remind yourself of that, I think is important. And if there are things that you don't get time to address, thinking about how you might follow up with a relevant care team member. And that might just be a question to the director of care and say, I do have a question about this, or you might direct your question to those around the table and say, is there a time we can set up a meeting outside of this? I'd love to just chat about X. Again, that gives the staff member a little bit of a heads up about what it is that you want to discuss and when they might have time in their schedule to meet with you. And I think most folks are happy to meet. It's just, reaching out and just saying, can I? And again, just claiming that space to which you're entitled. Now, sorry,
you
go ahead,
see that
Gloria.
question, right? It's like both parents are in long-term care and the care conference is done at the same time. I agree, that would be really tough to get some amount of time for both. And so how do you see that, Heather?
Well, that's interesting. I'm thinking back to the research we did, Gloria, and I do remember sitting in on a care conference where there were both parents were in care and the conversation, and there really wasn't that much time. I mean, think about it. You're expected to get through in that same period of time that would typically be allotted for one person, is now just allotted for two. And so I think it's perfectly within your purview to come back and say, I just don't feel that's enough time. Is it possible, to put mom on the schedule here and, maybe my concerns aren't as pressing for dad and maybe we could do that next month if that would be okay. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the same day, but just thinking about that. So I think, again, it absolutely is tough to get through that same amount of information. And again, reach out and just say that's just not going to work. Is there a way we can think of a workaround for that? Oh, now questions are popping up into the chat. Could it be helpful to give copies of your concerns, questions to each of the staff as the meeting starts so they can be targeted? That's a great idea, Lynn. I would say not necessarily as the meeting starts. I would say if you're able to submit something sooner than that, that would be better because staff do spend some time preparing for the care conferences and looking at things. So if they have that information ahead of time, they can be just that little bit more prepared.
So then Margot asks the questions, does the care home usually only want one specific person that they'll give information to? If another family member talks to them for information, would they speak to them? And then Margot, you also say, I guess that would be where the representation agreement comes into effect. Certainly, care homes like to have a designated person to be able to discuss things with. It just makes it easier and less confusing for everyone to have that primary contact. And so, but other family members can be listed as contacts, but not necessarily the primary contact. So the representation agreement certainly comes into effect when you're making those key decisions. And that certainly, if you are being asked to make decisions around the medical orders for scope of treatment, that certainly is something that you as a representative would be needing to do. So, things moved. Sorry.
Yes, I was trying to read through the questions before they shifted up.
I just wanted to acknowledge something that Sue Skeets has written, and in terms of the MAID conversations, she suggests that to go to the Dying with Dignity website. These speak to our federal laws, and not everyone is really on top of this knowledge, including staff at the facilities. So, and these laws have been changing. So I think it's really important that you are abreast of what those laws are, and certainly. If somebody does request MAID in a facility, there'd be separate assessors and providers. So it's not in the jurisdiction of the facility itself to do all of that. So there's a whole different kind of process. But yeah, so I think it's really important to have a look at that website, thedyingwithdignity.ca.
We just got a really good question in the chat box as well, asking about care plans. So during the care conference, staff members refer to and read from a written care plan. Can you explain who has access to that care plan? And can a resident or a residence representative see the care plan?
Yes, most definitely. So what should happen after the care conference, because the intention is to build that care plan or goals of care, and that is something that you have collaborated together in developing, and so you should be able to have a look at that care plan to see what the kinds of things that you're working towards. And so, and sometimes, some facilities, at least in my doctoral research, the facility had the care plan in the residence room so families could read it. So it might be quite accessible to you. And so you might want to ask the facility, where is that care plan, or the home, where is that care plan? And can I have a look at that? I want to just follow up to Jane's comment about, well, care plans are good, experience shows that follow up, i.e. info on how things are going. There seems to really be no active follow-up with family. That's something that you can really address with the home, and about tips for communication, about the sort of that lines of communication. So not only how you might want to be communicated with, whether that's with phone or email, but really honing in on what Heather said about the timing of it. So after a care conference, saying this was really great, would really appreciate a follow-up conversation about this, about how we're moving forward, or XYZ. But I think to take that, be brave, have the courage to say, you know what, I would like some follow-up. And sometimes care staff are just kind of oblivious to this, that families do want to be kept in the loop. So really make that need known to them. So that was a great comment there, Jane.
I just want to say thank you so much, Gloria and Heather, for coming today and sharing your time and your expertise with us. I know I learned a lot of good strategies, and I hope that everyone joining us took away something as well. This has been great, and we really appreciate your time today. If you do have additional questions, please feel welcome to call the First Link Dementia Helpline. So you can call us and speak with a staff member who can maybe walk through some of what was shared today with you, and you can brainstorm a little bit. Sometimes having that feedback can be helpful. So jot down that number and feel free to give us a call if you'd like to talk through this a little bit more.